All right, guys, what's going on? Today in Comic Book Workshop, we are looking at the artist Sergio Toppi and or Tope. I'm really bad at pronouncing names, apparently. And so, outside of butchering these artists' names, we're also going to break down and look at some of their art and see what it is we can learn from them. If you're new to this Comic Book Workshop tutorial series, each week, I'm looking at different comic book artists as part of a research for my own comic books that I'm making called the Philip K. Dick Files, which you can get a free 19-page sample of in the link in the description on my website, or you can get the first 4 issues if you sign up for my Patreon or checking out my store. And so I'm doing these as basically research as I'm learning and trying to understand and grow as a comic artist. And so I thought that I would do these tutorial series where each week I look at a different comic artist and I basically break down what is it that they're doing and what I can actually learn from it. So this is something that is useful for people that do any kind of narrative, um, any visual narrative based content. So hopefully this is useful for you guys if you're a comic artist. So let's go ahead and let's jump into it. So Sergio is known for having like this really unique abstract style, which is something it is that I really appreciate because I think that as a comic artist, a lot of the times we can get very settled into drawing like everybody else, right? Like a lot of people like to draw like the Jim Lees of American comics, or we look at people like, or we look at the manga style, which has become it's it's become very singular in a lot of ways, and we tend to look at that stuff and we think that we need to draw like that. But when you look at somebody like Sergio, for example, you see that that there are a lot of different ways it is that you can do comics. And what I really appreciate about his work is that there is a strong understanding that he is not just conveying a story, but he's also creating a piece it is that could be sold as an original. And that's something I talked about with Mike Mignola. And I think we're going to see some overlap with Mike Mignola and Sergio. So this first image it is that I have here, like I said in the previous episodes, I am not always familiar with where these pieces are coming from. I'm looking at them without the context of the full story. So I may end up missing things, but just from a technique perspective, what I really like is we have this strong kind of movement that's moving us up here like this, and then we have a hard stop, right? So there's a lot of these very diagonal lines that are they're following through, and that you could say are going back down, or they're following through the head. But we have this strong kind of stop motion here with the sword, right? And that's definitely intentional. Messing or playing around with the way it is that you direct a person's eye by having a bunch of diagonal lines and then having a line that's going in a different direction, but is also diagonal, is a good way to guide the eye to where it is that you want it to look. And obviously, we see that the way it is that the place it is that he wants us to look first is up here. And then we look down here. And so there's elements of contrast in both of these areas. We obviously see the elements of contrast in terms of the diagonal lines and the way it is that he pushes our attention in one direction or the other. Um, but there's also other ways in which it is that he directs our vision. One of those is with these speech bubbles, right? And notice that with this speech bubble up here, or with this illustration in general, uh, the star of the show is the drawing itself. It is not the background. And this is something else I talked about with Mike Mignola's work, right? So with Mignola's work, what's interesting about his work is how simplified it is that it can be, but how good it is that it looks. And with Sergio, I think we see something very similar. We see an artist that is not afraid to go crazy with the detail, but he knows where to put it. And he knows what it is that he wants to illustrate, and everything else just kind of falls away into this kind of abstract background. And we see the same thing it is that we talked about with Mike before, right? So we see these talking head figures, and instead of positioning them in a 3D space where it is that he might have to think about where it is that they're positioned and whatnot. Instead, he thinks about them in terms of these kind of shapes, right? And he goes crazy with these ornamental designs and the way it is that he has the heads pop out of the designs themselves, right? And so he has these very abstract shapes. And within these very abstract shapes, he has faces that are poking out of them, that come out of them, which is really an interesting way to draw. And then he has these speech bubbles that go over that. So, because he's able to use these abstract shapes as a way to direct your eye and as a way to organize his image, to help him organize his image, such as this big black shape here, if you think about it, it's accomplishing a couple of different things. It's acting as a background for this part of the drawing, right? And it's basically acting as a placeholder or as a space for him to create a contrasting element of a lot of detail in the drawing here in the face. And it's also allowing him to connect all of these shapes together. So these three figures. Again, we have this very simple, deceptively simple drawings going on here. One could look at a drawing like this and say, well, this is just super simple. He's just kind of throwing in lines wherever. But this is not the case. When we scroll in and we look at the line work, we can see that there's a lot of thought put into this, in that he is often changing the direction of the hatching. And this is helping him create a sense of something three-dimensional that is changing in 3D space, right? So if this is a cliff, if this is a rock cliff, you can see that this figure is peering over. You can see he changes the way it is that he hatches it, and by changing the way it is that he hatches it, we get this sense that it is a almost abstract form, right? And we see that here on the helmet too. We've got diagonal lines going this way. We've got some lines going up this way, like this, like this. I'm just kind of tracing over these just to give you an idea of how it is that he's laying these out. But truthfully, uh, he's got a lot of experience. And so he knows how to use these in order to really sell you the form, right? And we see the same thing here in the background. But you can tell that the cross hatching back here is way more uniform. It's more uniform, and it's closer to a black almost here and here. And then we pull into this image of this figure here, and we get even more detail. And we see this really nice smudge sort of things going on here, and this texture that he's able to create, which is interesting to think, like, how did he create that? Is he throwing down some ink, some big blocks of ink, and then coming back in with a towel or something and blocking it up? But he keeps the same orientation of this other shape over here. And you can see that it creates a really interesting look. because he has this figure here that is completely in the black. And there's so much detail going on here. And it just kind of fades in and out of the black. And he keeps it consistent, the look consistent. And then he just has a white background, you know. Similar thing here, right? He's keeping all the detail where it is that he wants it to be. That's helping him tell the story. And this shape is also pointing us towards this other word bubble. And in a sense, it's creating its own, by the negative space around it, it creates its own word bubble. Again, same thing here. Really, really expert use of blacks and the way it is that he's able to frame a drawing using these blacks in order to give him a place to put the detail. And then he also has the whites as well that are playing off this element of contrast. So he is using line hatching as a way to create basically a gray tone, while everything around it is just the blacks, right? And of course, that creates a really interesting composition because he's able to bring these silhouettes out of these blacks in the background. And he's able to show some depth. He's able to show some distance and to imply that. But at the same time, he's able to have this element of abstract thought almost, like this drawing almost feels like a thought. It feels like somebody is in the process of thinking about something in a sense. All right, so we just got a couple more. Again, I mean, I think the pieces that he does, they're they're beautifully done and they're very abstract. And I also love the way that he does his shape designs. He takes these kind of tribal designs and he explores the way it is that he wants to convey this and how he wants to convey these figures, especially these female figures, which I think are quite interesting, right? You've got these female figures and you've got these jewelry, and instead of going in and detailing all this jewelry, instead he saves all that detail for giving you the shape of the face with these hatching techniques, and then he uses the negative space of this jewelry in order to draw your attention there, right? And then you have these kinds of shapes here, right? And then you have almost like this direct line. There's other things too that I notice. There's almost a direct line that goes from her to him. You could almost say it's direct eye sight. And he even leaves, you can even look at this shape right here. This right here is almost like he's indicating that. I mean, this shape here almost doesn't even make any sense. Like, why is this not hatched in? And I think the reason is because he was trying to open it up so that your eye would kind of fall into this groove and it would take you straight to the bottom of the page, right? So it's almost like your eye starts here, and we have this awesome looking shape here of this, whatever this is. Then he summoned the wise man and lavished him with great riches and wonders. So this is something he's using to summon something, perhaps this figure. And then we go here, and then we get this direct line here, and then here, right? So he's, like I've said before, good design is essentially organizational skills, right? Again, another expert use of organizational skills. You have this very dark image of this face, which is showing us all the emotion, the horror of war in his face. That's really what it is that he's trying to draw on this page. And then he also has this scene of these figures running, and it communicates quite a lot because you have to think like, okay, if you're drawing a comic book page, each page needs to be able to convey an idea, it needs to be able to convey an image, a story. It needs to be something that both looks good as a drawing, but then it also looks good as a storytelling. device, like it's actually communicating the story. So even though I can't speak, I'm guessing this is Russian, I can't speak it. So I cannot speak this, but however, um, I do see from this perspective that uh, that there is a strong storytelling element. You know, I can see that these guys are rushing to get into the trench, right? And they're getting ready because it looks like something has happened or is about to happen. Like maybe he's holding his face, so maybe the gas has been released, something like that, right? Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close out this one. Uh, and I'm just going to say that uh, he's a really good artist to look at. I wish more people would do in his style. I think I'm gonna kind of adopt what he does into my own work because I think it's quite useful for a comic artist because you know he has a really good way of illustrating a story while at the same time giving it kind of an abstract flair to his work. So anyway, like I said, you know, if you're interested in checking out more of these tutorials, I have more on my YouTube channel. I've got a collection of these comic art workshop tutorials. You can check them out. I've also got interviews with comic artists here on this channel at the Independent Creatives Podcast. If you're interested in supporting what it is that I do, and you would like to get some comics and also some tutorials ahead of time, possibly some exclusive tutorials and stuff like that, you can check out my Patreon. I also have a Discord server where I've got a bunch of people that come and hang out and draw together. That's in the description box below. And I do these daily streams of working on my own comic or just warming up with my sketchbook. So I always welcome people to come and hang out on my channel and tell me about what projects you're working on, share with us, and let's get better together. If it's something that interests you, feel free to do so. In the meantime, though, I appreciate you guys for watching my videos. I hope it was helpful for you. And thank you so much. Take care.